And I want to focus today on one of the vessels of the tabernacle, and specifically the materials from which it was constructed. The verse tells us that Bezalel made the kior, kior is the laver, out of copper. He made the laver and its stand. This is a basin of water that was placed between the entrance of the sanctuary and the outer altar. And every day, the Kohanim, the priests, they would wash their hands and their feet before entering the sanctuary and before doing any service in the tabernacle. They would actually place their right hand on their right foot, their left hand on their left foot, and there was a lever, there was a spout, a spigot from which the water would come out. They'd wash their right hand, they'd wash the left hand, and they would be ready to enter the tabernacle and to do the service in the tabernacle. Now, the verse tells us that it was constructed using mirrors of women. Today, of course, a mirror is glass, a little thin sheet of silver. But in antiquity, they used different items that were reflective, and highly polished copper is reflective. So you would use it as a mirror. How did they source the copper for the copper laver? People donated copper, but specifically the copper that was used by women as mirrors, that's what was used for the laver for the kior. Now, Rashi has a comment on this. It's one of the most interesting Rashis in the entire Torah. He gives the whole backstory of these mirrors and the very unusual debate between God and Moshe regarding the suitability of using these mirrors for an item, for a vessel in the tabernacle. Rashi tells us that in Egypt, the women would use these mirrors when applying makeup. This is not new, I guess. They would use a mirror and they would put makeup on their faces with the help of these mirrors. And Rashi tells us that Moshe, when the women came to donate their mirrors, Moshe didn't want to accept it. Moshe reasoned, this is the tabernacle. This is the place where God's presence is going to dwell. This is God's home, as it were, in this world. These mirrors, the women would use them to become more attractive, and that would be a tool to spur the desire of their husband. Therefore, it's a tool to spur the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. And the evil inclination, that's the foreign God. And this is the home of God Almighty. So Moshe thought it was inappropriate to accept these mirrors for the tabernacle project. Rashi tells us this. And Rashi continues that God said, no, you have to accept it. You have to accept these mirrors. Why? Very interesting. God said to Moshe, accept them, because these mirrors are the most cherished in my eyes, so to speak. God's saying, of all the different items that were donated, the one that's most cherished by God are these mirrors. Of all the contributions, of all the gold, of all the silver, of all the other copper, of all the various fabrics and skins and wood, the most cherished in the eyes of God are the mirrors used by the women in Egypt to beautify themselves. Why? Because of these mirrors, the nation grew. And the women were able to raise legions of Jews. Very interesting. These mirrors helped the women beautify themselves, and that contributed towards the demographic explosion of the nation. Why is that? So again, this is all in the comment of Rashi. Very fascinating. The Egyptians enslaved the Israelites, and they made them do back-breaking labor. And the women, the wives of these slaves, they would come to their husbands slaving away and bring them food and drink. And they would take the mirrors with them. And again, this is all the words of Rashi. They would use the mirrors to flirt with their husbands. They would take the mirror and look together in the mirror, and the women would tell their husbands, "Oh, I'm way more beautiful than you." And through this process, again, this is all in Rashi, the men would become desirous of their wives and they would procreate. And that's why these mirrors are called the mirrors of the legions, because how did the nation end up with legions of Israelites? It was thanks to the mirrors. And therefore, it's appropriate to accept these mirrors as donations and to make them part of the tier, part of the laver. Why specifically are these mirrors used for the kiyar, for the laver? So again, all part of Rashi. Rashi explains that the laver, it's the most fitting place to incorporate these mirrors. Why? Because these mirrors, these highly polished copper mirrors that the Jewish women used in Egypt to beautify themselves and to ensure the continuity and the proliferation of the nation, these mirrors, they engendered love and harmony amongst the Israelites and their families. It brought husband and wife together under very difficult circumstances. The laver is used to promote peace between husband and wife. Why? Because when there's a suspected adulteress, a sota, a woman who's secluded with another man who's not her husband, and they secluded together for sufficient time for them to, God forbid, have committed adultery, and this gets resolved via the laver. Why? Because the woman comes to Jerusalem, and they give her to drink water from the kiyar, from the laver. And they dissolve other things into the water. And if she committed adultery, well, then that water would judge her, and she would die as a result of drinking this water. But if she was innocent, she would emerge unscathed, and in fact, she would be the recipient of tremendous blessing due to her trouble. The laver is designed to restore harmony between husband and wife, and therefore it's fitting, it's apt that the copper mirrors that were originally so instrumental in promoting, in fostering love and harmony and peace and positivity and optimism between husband and wife, that should be applied to the laver that uses its water for the same purpose, to restore love and harmony between husband and wife and to remove suspicion. That's what Rashi says, a very fascinating Rashi. The women had mirrors, and it was used to arouse their husbands and to procreate, and it created legions of Israelites, despite the very trying, very difficult, quite unthinkable circumstances and conditions that they were subjected to. Moshe sees the mirrors. You can't use this for the tabernacle. It's inappropriate to bring something into God's home, something that was used to spur the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. And God says, no, this is the most cherished of all the donations because it spawned legions, or it contributed towards the spawning of legions of Israelites. And that's why the laver that has the water of the sota, it's the laver of love. It's going to use these copper mirrors as its material. I want to examine this Rashi from two different angles. There's no person in all of human history that was as much aligned with the will of God, with the knowledge of God, as Moshe. Moshe understood the knowledge of God. He understood Torah on the highest level more than anyone else. And we find here a disagreement, ostensibly. And not just a disagreement, opposite perspectives that Moshe has versus God with respect to these mirrors. Moshe said, you can't bring this to the tabernacle. It's inappropriate. All other copper and all other gold and all other silver can be used, not this. His rationale, of course, is it was used to spur the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is the evil inclination. Evil inclination is the foreign god. The evil inclination is the idea that there's some sort of alternative, a replacement, God forbid, for the Almighty. It's not appropriate to bring that into the tabernacle. The Almighty doesn't just disagree. God doesn't say, oh, it's tolerable. You could still take it. Yeah, it was used for the Yetzer Hara, but it's okay. God doesn't say that it's okay. God takes the complete polar opposite perspective. There is nothing more cherished, more desirable, more appropriate, more fitting for the tabernacle, for the laver, than these mirrors. It's polar opposite perspectives. To Moshe, it was inappropriate to include in the tabernacle, and God says this is the absolute best. How do we understand such a radical disagreement between Moshe and the Almighty? I think there's a very powerful insight over here. The women come and they want to donate towards the tabernacle. What are you giving? We have some highly polished copper mirrors, highly reflective mirrors. What were these used for? Oh, these were used for the women to beautify themselves in Egypt. This is a tool used to spur on the evil inclination, to spur carnal desire. That's what Moshe said. And God said, well, it was used to bring about legions of Jews. What's the argument over here? There's a fundamental and powerful insight. Moshe is saying this is a tool of the Yetzer Hara, of the evil inclination, of the foreign god. And God does not contest that point. Of course, these mirrors were used to spur the Yetzer Hara. But nevertheless, that's why it's the most cherished. Because it was used for the Yetzer Hara in the best sort of way. It spawned legions of Jews. To take the Yetzer Hara and to repurpose it and refashion it and redirect it and recalibrate it for a noble goal, that's not just okay. That's not just tolerable. That's the absolute best of the best. There's nothing as beloved, as cherished by God, as the taking of something that can be used for bad and redeploying it for good. What are these mirrors used for? Everyone agrees it's for the Yetzer Hara. That's not part of the argument. But Moshe says, well, okay, well, how can we bring it to the tabernacle? This is the dwelling place of God. We can't bring a foreign god or anything that's associated with the foreign god into the tabernacle. The Almighty is telling Moshe, and the Torah is telling us, this is paraphernalia of the evil inclination. But because it was used in this manner, in this context, for this purpose, it's not just okay, it's not just tolerable, you could submit it if you want, it's kosher, it's admissible. There is absolutely nothing more cherished than this. We have something within us called the Yetzer Hara. This was implanted within us at birth. This is our soul, and I'm using that term in both ways that it's spelled, antagonist. It antagonizes our soul, our neshama. It tries to cause damage to our soul. And really, the only thing we need to do in this world, and of course, I wrote about this in my book, which I'm sure all of y'all have read multiple times by now, the only barometer of success in life in the eyes of the spiritual lens is, did a person overcome the Yetzer Hara? That's the sole focus. That's the sole antagonist. We have a Yetzer Hara. What are you supposed to do about that? There are different approaches. You're supposed to control it. Talmud says you should beat it up as if you have a stick and you bludgeon it. You should belittle it, mock it, deride it. There are different tactics for how to engage with this enemy. The highest level of responding to the Yetzer Hara is where you turn an erstwhile adversary into a friend, into someone who helps advance and contribute towards the agenda of your soul. The Midrash tells us at the very end of the narrative of Genesis Vayar Elokim, and God saw all that he made. Vihine, and behold, Tov Me'od. It was very good. It was Tov Me'od. It says the Midrash, Tov, when it says the word good, it's a reference to the good inclination. Me'od. When it says very good, exceedingly good, that is a reference to the Yetzer Hara. A good inclination, that's good. You know what's even better than that? A bad inclination. When it is redirected for a proper use, for the proper context, for the proper setting, calibrated in the correct fashion, the Yetzer Hara actually is even better than the Yetzer Tov. These copper mirrors are the most cherished because yes, it was used for the Yetzer Hara, but in the right context. The Yetzer Hara is an adversary, is an enemy. Our sages tell us it's the worst enemy that we have. But it in itself can be used to be the best ally, the best friend, the most cherished of friends. It could be even better than Yetzer Tov. And that's what God's telling Moshe. Yes, it's the Yetzer Hara, but it's the most cherished. It's the best of the best. Multiple times a day, we recite the Shema. And the first verse after the initial declaration of the Shema, we say, it's a mitzvah, Ve'ahavta, you should love Hashem your God, Bechol levavcha, with all your, it's always translated incorrectly, with all your heart. Rashi tells us, and really Hebrew grammar tells us, that the word levavcha does not mean your heart, it means your hearts. What do you mean your hearts? You only got one heart. Doesn't mean to love Hashem with the muscle in your chest cavity. It means to love Hashem with the inclinations that are spurring you to action, that are motivating you to do things. And for that, you have two. You have the good inclination, the good heart, and you have the bad inclination, the bad heart. What does it mean to love God with both of your hearts? It means with your good heart and with your bad heart. And here we see that what's more cherished than anything else, more cherished than any mitzvah done with a good inclination, is a mitzvah done with the bad inclination. To take the Yetzer Hara and turn it into a friend, that's the highest level. A few weeks ago, we talked about a very interesting idea. Sounds unbelievable, really, that Purim is loftier than Yom Kippurim, than Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is only like Purim. It's a mini Purim. How's that possible? Yom Kippur is the holiest day, the loftiest day. How can we say it's a poor man's Purim? This is the idea. On Purim, we eliminate evil. Excuse me. On Yom Kippurim, we eliminate evil. On Purim itself, we transform evil into good. You recall we talked about how the grandsons of Haman studied Torah. The idea that there's something which is so evil, it's like the embodiment of evil, it's like the evil inclination, it's like the angel of death, it's like the Satan, it's like the Amalek. Haman. Talmud tells us that Haman's grandchildren converted and studied Torah with the great sages of Israel. That is the ultimate goal of Purim, to take all that's bad and repurpose it into good. And that's why it's more cherished than Yom Kippur. It's like those copper, highly polished copper mirrors. These mirrors embody evil. Moshe didn't want it. And God says, you know what? Ordinarily, you are correct. But this happens to be an example, a perfect case of a negative redirected for good, redirected for a higher cause, for a higher purpose. And that is the most cherished of all. An amazing idea, an amazing lesson. I want to share a second idea. Very profound, very interesting, very deep. You got to listen carefully. Moshe made a call, fundraising. It's fundraising season all over the world, I guess. It's happening right now, givetorch.org, if you want to put it into your browser. He needs gold and silver and copper and different types of fabrics and different types of skins and wood and precious jewels. And then people come with polished copper. Women, they show up with polished copper mirrors. And that's questionable. But here's a problem. When it talks about the gold, it describes, chapter 35, verse 22, they brought gold jewelry. And they brought rings and bracelets and earrings, vechumas and kumas. What's kumas? That's an unusual term. So Rashi tells us it was a gold ornament that women wore over their genitalia. That's what it says. And the word kumas, it's a shortened version of kan makrom zima. Here is a place of promiscuity. This is all in Rashi. Again, if this sounds a little adult themed, I'm just quoting what Rashi says. The kumas was a gold ornament that women wore in their private areas. And that was brought to the tabernacle. I don't understand. Moshe's protesting. Don't bring me any polished copper mirrors. That's inappropriate. How could he possibly accept the kuma's adornments? He doesn't protest about that at all. He accepts it right away. We don't hear about that emotion. Oh, this is not appropriate. This is a question the commentators asked. How can it be that Moshe challenges the suitability of the mirrors, but when it comes to the kumas, this gold ornament, he just accepts it, and we don't have any record of any dialogue. So one of the commentators says, oh, no, you're misreading it. It wasn't used to spur the Yetzer Hara, it was used to curb it. It was like a chastity belt. Okay, that's one answer. The Maharal offers a second idea. People came with gold. Someone came with the gold earrings and gold nose rings and gold other vessels, gold ladles or pots or other items of gold. They would take all the gold and they would melt it down. And they would create gold bars or ingots. And no one would be able to see from the vessels that you made it of it, from the menorah, from the ark, and so on, from the table, from the shulchan. No one will be able to trace back the origin of the gold that was contributed. All the parts of the tabernacle were made out of donated material. And they would take the material, restore it back to its base material, and then use that to make the items of the tabernacle. That's true for all the vessels of the tabernacle, with the exception of the laver. The laver, the kior, that water basin we talked about, it wasn't made out of copper that had been restored to bars or ingots of copper. It was simply taking those mirrors and placing them as the laver. They weren't melted down and refashioned into a laver. The mirrors themselves were pieced together, unaltered, exactly the way they are, into the laver. So the kumas, maybe it's not such an appropriate thing to be in the tabernacle, but once you restore it back, you melt it down, you restore it back to just a block of gold, there's no recognition, there's no indication of where it came from. But the laver was just those mirrors. And because it was not restored back to the way it was, the kumas, that gold adornment, it was forgotten by the time it was made into whatever materials it was made into. You couldn't see in the menorah or in the table or in the ark or in the cherubs, you couldn't find your piece of jewelry. It was all just put together into one big pot and made into bars and then refashioned. But the laver was actually those mirrors, and therefore Moshe says, okay, if we're not going to alter it, maybe it's inappropriate. God said no. That's what the Maharal says. The laver was not just made of copper that was sourced from those mirrors, it was made from those actual mirrors. Those mirrors that the woman brought, God said, don't take it. Moshe thought not to take it. God said, you must take it. It's my favorite. It's my most cherished. Those mirrors that were used to spawn legions of Israelites, those mirrors themselves were the laver. That's what the Maharal says. And this is kind of a mind-expanding insight. Why was the laver made differently than all the other items? The laver was made out of copper. So how do you make something out of copper? You take all the copper that you assemble, you melt it down into bars, and then you refashion those bars into a laver. And that would solve Moshe's problem. Moshe would be happy with that. But there's an imperative, specifically, to not change, to not alter those mirrors. They themselves should be the laver. A very deep idea. I heard this idea from one of my rabbis, Rabbi Berkowitz. This laver did something found nowhere else in Jewish life or Jewish jurisprudence. There's a suspected adulteress. She's secluded with a man. Husband says, don't spend time privately with this man. She did it anyhow. There's witnesses. We don't know what happened behind closed doors. But it's possible that she may have committed adultery. Terrible. That's a capital crime, both the adulterer and the adulteress. And there's laws. This marriage must end in divorce. And there's different monetary laws. For example, every man who gets married in a Jewish setting commits to pay a severance. It's like the earliest prenup. There's a severance you have to pay. It's called the ketubah. If a woman commits adultery, that's how the marriage gets dissolved. The husband would not be responsible to pay this severance fee. Now, if she was innocent, then they can resume living together, no problem. All's well. So there's a halachic problem here. We don't know what happened behind closed doors, and there's enormous ramifications for this. This is like a case that has to be adjudicated in a court of law. And there's no court of law that addresses this dilemma. The woman is brought to the temple, and they go to the laver, and they take some water out of the laver, and they mix it with some other ingredients, and they concoct a special drink, and this drink does the judgment. If she was innocent, then the water from the laver would inform us of that. If she was guilty, then the water of the laver would inform us of that. This was an adjudication of a halachic dilemma done miraculously. When there's a problem, there's a case brought to a court, there's a system. You have to bring witnesses, you have to bring proofs, you have to bring arguments, evidence, documentation, testimony. That's how a court resolves halachic uncertainties. In exactly one case, we use a miracle. A suspected adulteress, there's a halachic dilemma, a halachic uncertainty, it's resolved via miraculous means. You get the water from the laver. And with those waters made or housed in the laver that was made from the copper mirrors that the woman in Egypt used to perpetuate the nation, to spawn legions of Israelites, with that water from that laver, you resolve that question. Again, nowhere else in Jewish law do we use miracles to determine a halachic question. Where does that power come from? Where does the laver have the power to resolve a very serious halachic dilemma in a way unlike any other halachic dilemmas? That was baked into the copper The copper mirrors that the women used to promote love and harmony between husband and wife to create families in Egypt. There were women, incredible heroines, who had tremendous sacrifice and commitment to make sure that their families don't fall apart in Egypt. You know what it's like? Can you imagine? There's depression, there's servitude, there's mistreatment, there's dehumanization of an entire nation in Egypt. They should fall apart, but they stay together. There's heroic women using these mirrors to hold families together, to promote love and harmony and peace and continuity amongst these families. And that's embodied by these mirrors. And that's why these mirrors had to go onto the laver unaltered. They have such power in them. You can't just take them and melt them down to the base material and reconstruct them. The laver, it's the only vessel that's going to be used for a miracle. A miracle of what sort of miracle? A miracle of restoring peace and harmony and stability and love in a marriage that's on the rocks. The only way to do that is if you take those mirrors as they are and you make the laver out of them. Because those mirrors contain the power of those heroic women in Egypt. Melting the mirrors down is just not an option. It's an amazing idea. There was harmony. There was stability under unimaginably harsh conditions in Egypt. These women, they fostered marital harmony in a place where otherwise it would not be possible for it to exist. They created united families. They created an army, a legion of Israelites. The power of all their effort is implanted in the mirrors that they used. And those mirrors went into the laver unaltered to eternally stabilize and bring back to harmony homes that are being rocked by pain, by conflict. A very powerful idea. When someone does something good or heroic or courageous, that creates spiritual power that will never go away. In the words of the Mishnah, when someone does a mitzvah, they create an angel. There is nothing that will endure in our physical world like an angel will endure. It will endure forever. Spiritual power never erodes, never atrophies. It doesn't have a shelf life. It doesn't have a half-life. It reverberates forever. And if you have a mirror or any item that was used for a mitzvah, the power of that mitzvah is forever implanted in that item. 1,000 years after the Exodus, 1,500 years after the Exodus, there was still a miracle in the tabernacle, in the temple. When all the other miracles went away, the laver still had power. Where did it come from? It came from the heroism of these remarkable matriarchs. What they did created eternal power, eternal gravity. When someone does a mitzvah, they change the spiritual makeup of the entire world. And of course, the opposite is also true. God forbid someone does a sin, it has the effect in the opposite direction. We can elevate the world and elevate everything in our environment with every action, with every word that we say, with every thought that we have, with every action that we do. This gives us tremendous responsibility. You see what these women did. Moshe doesn't want to take it. And God says, no, you don't realize the power of these mirrors. We're not going to melt them down and turn them into something else. No, these mirrors have power that will never erode, that will never go away. We have opportunities to do mitzvos. Once someone passes, that opportunity goes away. Like if they have a child who does a mitzvah on their behalf, who dedicates a mitzvah on their behalf, then that's the exception. But otherwise, we lose the opportunity forever. And here we see an example, a portrait of righteousness and how that never goes away. Two amazing lessons. We have the laver. Laver made of copper. Moshe doesn't want it. And God says, no, this is the most cherished. Idea number one. This was a tool for the evil inclination. Yes, 100%. But this is an example of loving God with both your hearts, the good and the bad heart. This is an example of taking what could be an adversary and turning it into something good. God saw all that he made, and it was very, very good. It was good. That's a reference to the good inclination. It was very, very good. That's the evil inclination. Repurposed, refashioned for good. That's taking Haman, that's taking Amalek, that's taking the Satan, the evil inclination, the angel of death, and turning it into a friend, into an adversary. Idea number one. Idea number two, the laver wasn't just made of copper that was sourced in those mirrors. It was made from those mirrors themselves, says the Maharal. And that's why we have one law that's adjudicated with a miracle. You can't rely on a miracle, right? Miracles, it's kind of hit or miss, right? You don't know if you're going to have a miracle. No, here you know for sure you'll have a miracle. Why? Because built into the walls of the laver is tremendous self-sacrifice and dedication for what? For harmony, for marital harmony. That power, it just exudes from the walls of the laver. And maybe we could even say it's not a miracle. It's not a miracle. That's what it's made of. It's made of dedication that restores harmony. So maybe it's not a miracle. That's just what it was made of, and that's just how it works. Very powerful, fascinating ideas, and I think ones with tremendous lessons for us. We have the opportunity to take our adversaries and turn them into friends. The Yetzer Hara can be used into advancing the cause of the soul, in loving God, and that's the most cherished of them all. And our actions have enormous repercussions and consequences and manifestations that can last forever, that don't erode. I appreciate your attention to this very fascinating idea about the laver, about the tabernacle. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we are running our annual fundraiser. We do only one fundraiser a year. And this will determine if we'll have the ability to continue the great work of Torch, to fuel the Torch in 2026. The link for that is givetorch.org. And there's actually all sorts of different pages that you could support. We appreciate your help. Every donation is doubled. If someone is a little bit unsure if they want to donate, I don't know if I want to do it, send me an email, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com, and put your number in there, and I will call you and I will persuade you to contribute to this great enterprise. We appreciate your support. Thank you so much for allowing us to do this, for giving us the strength and the fuel to do it. And please let it be a wonderful year of Torah study together from the Torch Center in Houston, Texas. The email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.